Hey, thought I'd give a little tip on print orientation. Now this might be staggeringly obvious that I did not print this vertically. I printed it lying flat on a bed. But it's surprising how much I see different things not designed to work well within bearing in mind I'm designing this for an FDM, or basically a nozzle that squirts things out in that way. Of course, if you're using laser sintering or any of these other things, you don't need to worry about these as much, because the orientation is less a factor. But certainly with, when most people say 3D printing, it's FDM, which is squirting stuff out in a nozzle, and it's important to remember that it's going to do things in a certain way. So first of all, not only is this good in terms of speed, and also what you're doing is you're creating layers of nice consistent sort of strings of plastic, and that means this is very, very strong in that direction, and indeed the only weakness is between the layers, but it's very unlikely that I'm driving anything sharp to try and split it or shear it in that direction. So for the purposes of this being nice and strong in this direction and that direction, this is absolutely the perfect orientation. And in many ways the analogy I would use is think a little bit like wood grain. And you hear the phrase work with the grain, and I would say that 3D printing has almost an inherent grain to it. So likewise, when I've been making little thin pieces like this, which is a sort of cylindrical shape, it makes sense for it to be printed vertically rather than like that. That's reasonably obvious. But then you also get certain parts which are a bit of a mix of the two, and I'd say that's where sometimes I try and give a little bit of extra support. So for example, this is a sort of a square section that comes all the way down, and then it's a little bit hard to see, but the transition, I've thrown a radius just to give it that little bit of extra support, and so it's actually got 1, 2, 3 layers going from the vertical into the planar disc here. So again, trying to use radii where it is helping bring things together and make them stronger, because you can appreciate if I was to get a pair of pliers and pull that, it's going to shear at that transition between the two layers, whereas if I had built it that way, it would of course be much stronger, but then this shape would be somewhat ridiculous to print layer by layer in that orientation. So sometimes it is a harmonizing of what is the best optimal condition for all things concerned. And likewise, you can appreciate that a circle, if I wanted a perfect circle, it's better to print it in that orientation, and so this one, for example, is very good. But when you consider that I'm putting a brass insert in this, it doesn't really matter. I just make the hole a tiny bit smaller, drill it out, and then it fits perfectly anyway. So again, being a little bit aware of how to design things so that they work well with the 3D print, and I quite often end up designing things in multiple parts if it means that it's actually more successful to either glue or screw things together in an assembly, rather than trying to make a part have to do 100 things. And that indeed explains why this part has not just got a secondary part that comes over the top, put it in the right way, that this piece comes together. It's also from a perspective of assembly that it would be very, very difficult for me to screw things in if this was essentially in the way, as the only access points I would have is all the way down there.